was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed. With the brass nozzle in his fist, with his great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor, playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning, to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next, he flipped the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted, above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Montag grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. That's a good opening.
It is a very good opening. It's very characteristic of Ray Bradbury.
With the poetry.
It's very poetic. It's very condensed too. Like already you can see, you've been told his name, his occupation, that it says that he has pleasure to burn, but whether or not that's borne out by the later part of the novel, we'll find out. But already, you're seeing, having a great insight into the character.
Yeah, I like that it had a short, sharp sentence. Burn, like it captures your attention.
Yes.
And then it really paints a visual with the fireflies and the kerosene
and it's got his symbolic helmets 451, reflecting the title of the novel already.
Yeah.
The temperature at which paper burns. Yes. He's it's often said that you can tell a novel by its opening line or its opening paragraph.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true of this sort of novel. But I think it's very characteristic of Ray Bradbury.
It's one of the most important things, I think, to group people. Like, I'm slow to get into things.
Yes.
So if it takes me a while, that just got me right away.
Very good point, yeah. I've discussed with you before how even famous novels can often not engage you. It's not that the novel's boring, but you yourself not responding to it.
Yeah.
I've tried several times to read Anna Karenina.
Yeah.
I get about, 25, 50, 60 pages into it, and I just can't quite get past that. Yeah, there are other novels I'll devour.
Yeah.
And I think that, it's probably...
Me with Moby Dick.
Sorry?
Me with Moby Dick.
Oh, my favourite novel. And Ray Bradbury was a big fan. He wrote the screenplay to John Huston's film of Moby Dick.
Ah, I didn't know that.
Yep. He actually mentions in his afterword how while he was doing the final copies of the long version of this story, he was asked by John Huston to go to Ireland for a year with his family and work on the screenplay. John Huston's, there's been several movie versions of Moby Dick, and probably the most true to the literary aspects was probably Ray Bradbury's. Some people might say that he had a bigger budget and more support to do that. Yeah. Although these days I think they also make it into mini-series. But yes, he loved Herman Melville.
I found his writing, I read it a little bit like talking, kind of like Catcher in the Rye almost, but not quite that. He's more poetic, but it just flows like thoughts. If that makes
That's a very astute observation, actually. Have you heard of the Beat poets?
No.
The Beat generation began in depending on who you take as a beat poet or a beat writer, but Allen Ginsberg, the novelist Jack Kerouac, poets like Ginsberg, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Gregory Corso, several others, they were very big in the 50s and 60s, and their poetry and their writing is very much like a kind of it's like a prose poem. It's full of vivid imagery, fantastic metaphors. It's to do with American everyday life, but done in a very fantastical way.
Yeah.
Like I think Lawrence Ferlinghetti had one called like a Coney Island of the mind. You know, like it has that kind of magical, surreal, kind of very psychedelic, drug-induced kind of vision of the world. Yeah. If you ever read Ginsberg's famous poem Howl.
Okay.
Yeah. But that has that kind of element. Well, this was published in 1953.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he is a beat poet, but I think that was part of the wider literary landscape.
Yeah.
That they were really interested in using very creative language. Okay, well, we've already just seen how he's a fireman. I mean, what for me is fascinating about the whole novel from start to finish is the irony of the whole book. I mean, the whole book is based on irony, that he's a fireman who burns books. He doesn't preserve property. He doesn't preserve life. He doesn't preserve art or whatever. He destroys it.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's what makes it such a great satire, that everything one expects of characters in the novel and their roles seems to be either a reverse or an inversion or a parody of that, you know.
Yeah. And I liked how at the end all of that history and all the contents of the books was retained by the person.
Yes.
They didn't have any books. They had their recollection of the books.
Yes.
It would come to them and inspire them. It wasn't just, I'm going to hoard this around, and it's so in tune with the people.
Yes, and they couldn't destroy the books because the books had become like an oral history. It was something that they could pass down from generation. A person became a book.
Yeah.
This man is the philosopher Ortega Gasset. This person is Mr. Lincoln. This person is Julius Caesar. This person is Herman Melville, whoever.
Yeah. And he couldn't remember it, but then it came to him.
I was thinking about that, how hard it must be to try and remember huge slabs of poetry and especially novels. But the Scottish historian Tom Macaulay, he famously boasted that he could recite all of Paradise Lost and John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress without fail, if he had to. If every copy of Paradise Lost or A Pilgrim's Progress was destroyed, he said I could recite them. And he had a incredible memory and an incredible ability to read fast. People talk about speed reading. He was a 19th century epitome of that.
That's impressive, because if I had to recall anything, the only thing I'd be able to recite word for word is like the film Shrek.
Or Mean Girls. No, but it's interesting. To be able to. I suppose there are many priests and preachers who could recite huge slabs of the Bible. But to commit things to memory, especially difficult poetry and complicated prose, it's like I'm trying to recover philosophy.
Also, especially with poetry, how every word you're interpreting.
Yes.
And really looking at. So just changing one slight word can change the interpretation completely.
And that's interesting because, I mean, throughout history, they've had troubles with translations. As people were translating copies of the Bible, words would be translated into another language, and they would give a change to the concept. Mm-hmm. Like when translating the Old Testament, the Greek word, in which about the tree of knowledge and good and evil, they used a word which was for fruit in general, melon, but the Latins used malum, which both meant evil and apple. That's where we get the idea that it was the forbidden fruit was an apple, but that's not in the original Greek. Because they were trying to find an equivalent, and then people just presumed it was a apple.
Oh. And then that's just carried on through everything. So
And
it's a red apple.
Yes, and then
Poisoned or...
yeah, and it's the tree of knowledge was Eve eats an apple, but there's no basis for that in the original.
Yeah.
But my broader point being that it must be very hard when you are trying to preserve a poem or a piece of literature not to change it in subtle ways, because people can actually improve things. That's what oral traditions did. That's why for centuries there's been a debate: was Homer one poet, or was he a tradition of Greek poets? The internal evidence that people, even if he might have produced the originals, they were modified by other poets, because it wasn't written down for centuries. It was written down much later than when the poems were composed. So it'd be interesting how that would be one little technical problem. You have to make sure that you really did commit it to memory.
Yeah. And that's a lot to retain over time.
But still, the camp people are a fascinating bunch too. I think there's the character Granger, who's sort of like their leader. There's so many of them were ousted academics like Professor Faber in the novel, but they all share this tremendous love, not just of literature, but of knowledge, and they want to preserve it. But they also see that it's not an end in itself. There's that great observation by Granger that many times they've had dark ages. They had the knowledge and the world still went to pot. And that's an important point about the novel. It's not just... Ray Bradbury doesn't seem to be saying that just preserving art, knowledge, learning is enough. It's its uses, which goes back to that scene where Faber is talking about what knowledge is, like what is good literature. It has quality of knowledge, but then you have to have the leisure to read it, to imbibe it. Then you have to have the political freedom and the social freedom to make choices about what you do with that knowledge. And I thought that was a very interesting observation. It's not just the content, it's not just the having quality literature, it's having been able to use that to express yourself.
Yeah.
And that ties in with other dystopias, like in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. Theirs is a benevolent dictatorship where people like Bernard Marx, who don't fit in and are intellectuals or they want to write poetry or whatever, they get shipped off to remote islands. They're not murdered. It's not some big brotherish death state. They're rendered ineffectual. Write all the poetry you like. You can live on your little islands. You're excluded from power. It's not like some a terrible Orwellian world where you're crushed completely, but you are limited. It is a dictatorship. You are, but they have a little bit more benevolent, and that there's an element of he's kind of in the middle here. He's saying no, we need the leisure to read it, and the opportunity to read it, but you also need the political freedom. You need Again, this is interesting as a novelist. He seems to preempt a lot of what goes on in the world because he has an alternative history. He takes back history back to the War of Independence, and when after the war, he has established 1790. The fireman was to burn English influenced books in the colonies. It's the idea is he pursues that right through the Civil War. And I think that's where Beattie comes into play, because Beattie is the embodiment of the modern democracy's ideology, and that he's like the enforcer of it, and he's there to make sure the firemen don't lose their nerve. He's there to make sure the firemen understand that they stand between chaos and order. He's always talking about social cohesion, and the main point being for Beattie, democracy is a fine thing. Everybody's equal. Nobody's inferior. He does say that at one point. he says that they're there to protect the mass man from the dread of being inferior. And he that was on page, I think, 76 or 77. And that's very interesting, because one of the great problems with democracy, which means rule by the people, is that you can have a tyranny of a majority. You can have 51% out of 100 could decide to do terrible things. They're the majority. But Ray Bradbury went further. He argues that this kind of tyranny would develop because America was becoming more diverse. The more minority groups you have of all kinds, not just ethnic groups, but different organisations, different religious beliefs, different political beliefs, different social beliefs or different groupings, everybody would have an axe to grind. Everybody would say, what about me? Everybody would be competing in their interests.
Everybody does say, what about me?
True. But their attitude, he was projecting into the future. How could you deal with this constant sensitivity, as we see today, by minorities for their interests? And the idea is that, well, nobody sticks out. There is no alternative knowledge. Everybody has to have the same thin soup of soap operas, 5-minute soap operas. Everybody has adrenaline sports. Everyone has adrenaline rushes through driving cars. Everybody has the most meagre education. No one can have individual experiences. Everything's commercial. Everything's planned. Everything is quick. It's explosive. It's like fireworks. There's nothing substantial there. It's a big distraction. But he says everybody's happy.
But they're not really happy.
No.
With the observation. Even Beatty, I think that's the thing that got me, is after when Montag's reflecting on his murder of him,
yes.
he said, I saw it, he wanted to die. Which, that observation I didn't expect, but it's, what kind of life are they all living? And
exactly.
I just thought it was interesting because I think Beatty quotes some literature at one point. He's read some, obviously.
Oh, he's highly educated.
Yet he's still preaching to them that they're not worth reading. What do? You come away lost. They cause more harm than good.
Yes, he's kind of like, he has the benefit of having read all this literature. He's fluent in several languages. He's a highly educated person. He tries to make out he's not, but he does come every now and then. He says, it's a bit like he'll say, I've had to read all this stuff so you don't, kind of thing. But as you say, there's he's not the only character we hear has an undercurrent of suicide, an undercurrent of pessimism about the world. He wants to protect. He's officially standing with the ideology. I'm going to protect everybody from feeling inferior. We're going to enforce a radical democracy. Nobody sticks out. Everybody's the same, completely the same. But is he satisfied in his soul? Has he does he see in has he betrayed his own humanity? Does he see that in people like Montag? Does he secretly envy Montag? It's hard to know, but he certainly does goad him on and bait him. He gives him a flamethrower, tells him to destroy his own house, his own books.
Yeah.
It's like, and he calls him a silly snob. He's really baiting him.
And didn't he ignore the first alarm called on his house? When someone put in an alarm for Montag?
Yes, he did actually. Yes, they sort of and he sort of implies that they when he goes to get when Montag is feigning sickness. Well, he is ill, but he's feigning sickness too, not to go into work. He gives him the long lecture about how important he is to society, how they want him to show up for work, how. But it's almost I lost my train of thought. But he's trying to you almost lay out for Montag the ideology.
Yeah.
But yes, but from his own, that last scene where Montag kills him, you sort of wonder whether he has too gone down that path of despair.
Which may even be somewhat subconscious the way Mildred's was.
Yes.
She doesn't even remember taking the pills.
No.
She's just back to her life with the TV walls, and
yes,
it's all consuming. It's just there's no time to think and feel your emotions. It's just a constant incoming.
That's what Faber says to him too. He says, "I've got a little TV, a tiny little TV, just so I can see what's happening in the world in some general sense. I don't want wall-to-wall televisions. I need to be able to avoid the distraction. How can you read literature? How can you do anything with this constant, explosive, loud, crass culture around?"
Which is interesting when you think about how much of what he ended up predicting back then seems true now. Like, we all have little shells, we have the little earbuds in our ears, and it's just a constant bombardment of short videos.
Yes.
And something's constantly grabbing your attention, and you're just always listening to something, always multitasking. And the more I do that, the harder I find it to concentrate and focus, and it affects me emotionally. So when I'm reading about Mildred, I feel really bad for her because she's miserable, but she can't work out why she's miserable because she's just consuming the constant nothingness of the talk that's in her aunts and uncles on the TV. Like, her
relatives, her family.
Yeah, who are providing nothing. It's all meaningless conversation. And
again, with as a satire, the irony, just like a fireman who burns books and people and property, you've got people like Mildred and Mrs. Bowles and Mrs. Phelps, who are housewives, of whom only one has children, Mrs. Bowles, and the others are all inwardly unhappy with their lives. They're on their third husbands. They're on all they do is drink cocktails and listen to, as you say, to these short TV skits and these crazy, surreal incidents on, like magical kind of tricks and things on TV. And my main point being that they're not. It's the irony is their family are not real, and they would rather. Society's got to the stage where they were saying that Beattie was saying how they don't even have eulogies for dead people. They don't celebrate births or deaths. You're immediately whisked off and cremated. You are not allowed to be an individual even in death. You can't reflect on you as a person, what you did in your life. A eulogy is a wonderful way of summing up all a person's achieved, or the connections they've had with people. They don't want you to have connections. They want you to have an imaginary family.
And that's why they're so miserable, because what you need in life is purpose and connection.
Yes.
So without that, they're just existing.
Yes. In fact, reading this book was it really brings home the how Ray Bradbury really sees social life and social connections. All that discussion of the McClellans, how they're a family where they talk and they do crazy things like sit on the porch and just talk, and they engage in social life. And Montag creeps out one night after Mildred tries to overdose, and he just wants to ask, "What are you saying? What are you talking about?" He's craving that kind of communication, that kind of involvement with others, because he hasn't got it with Millie.
Yeah.
And like you, he feels tremendously sad for Millie. That comes out at that last quite moving scene where he's imagining her a moment before she dies, and suddenly she realizes, like as Mrs. Phelps or Mrs. Bowles does when they read the poem by Matthew Arnold.
Yeah.
They feel the inadequacy of their lives. I think it was Mrs. Bowles becomes really hysterical over it.
Yeah.
Because they realise they're missing something, but they're inarticulate. They can't explain what it is that they're feeling.
I loved his choice of wording when Montag's imagining, when the bombs are going down and he's imagining Millie die, he's describing it as he saw or felt the walls go dark in Millie's face. Because that was her life. She wasn't Millie, she was these TV walls.
Exactly, yes. And in that the way he divides time into smaller and smaller units in the briefest possible moment before her annihilation, the poor woman sees herself for what she is. She's become a cipher. She's empty, and he feels tremendous pity for her, which is what I think Faber at one stage says to him. Don't mock these women. A short time ago, you were just like them. But you acknowledge you're unhappy. Whereas for Beatty, in his role as a ideologue, he keeps saying everybody's happy. Happiness is pure, sensual, immediate experiences of pleasure.
Go drive really, really fast on the highway so you can't even enjoy the cows or the scenery or things that you might actually enjoy. It's that have such a high thrill of driving so fast that you can't take anything in. It's all just frying your brain.
Yes.
Just keeping you frazzled from feeling anything.
And that's why if all the characters provide clues to Montag, as we've said before, just like Beatty provides the ideology, and he's telling him you should be happy, but he's not, and he secretly wants to read the books. That's where Clarisse McClellan and her family are so important, because she's like Montag. She says you have to. She doesn't say you have too much sensibility to be a fireman, but that she says you don't seem to be the right fit for a fireman. She knows that he's got a poetic temperament. He secretly wants to experience things.
I think she makes a comment about how people don't put up with her or something along those lines, because he actually converses with her and thinks about, she gets him to think, and he'll think about what she says. And
and it's so ironic though, Remwin, that she's considered by Beatty and the family, they're all considered social misfits in a world where juvenile delinquents go around killing people, running them down, stabbing each other, where people run amok.
Yeah. In
a world of delinquents, they are the social misfits, which again, it's the satire, the irony of all these characters. That's where it is a very nightmarish world, where everything one would think should be is this opposite. And I think that's where McClellan Clarisse is a wonderful character, because she really provides that foil for Montag's character. You can see why he he really admires her. He becomes to realise that she's got something, just like Faber's got something. Faber's got access to formal knowledge, the knowledge contained in books and art and other forms of films and everything. Whereas she's got it. She's a born poet. The way she wants just to experience life, stand in amongst the leaves, watching the leaves flutter around her feet, stand in the rain. She said, "Do you know that the grass has dew on it in the morning?"
Did you ever notice that?
Have you ever noticed the man in the moon? But in their world, they are very, very important observations. I mean, the poet Shelley, in his defence of poetry, points out that poets strip the world of its film of unfamiliarity. They make us aware of things we just grow so accustomed to seeing.
Yeah.
I remember there was, I think it was in a Victorian novel by Mrs. Gaskell called Cranford. The young ladies there were told about a very promising poet, Alfred Tennyson, and they'll say things like, this young man tells me that ash buds are black. I look, and they are black. For them, it's a revelation because you can be surrounded by stuff, surrounded by nature, surrounded by so many interesting things, but you kind of like, it's like the cliche, you know, don't stop to smell the roses, or as you said about the billboards and the grass. But I think it's part of that wider need for poetic experience, where children are full of it. What's that? You know, what's this? You know, they're constantly touching, feeling, experiencing, wanting to explore it. In their world, you're not supposed to.
Beauty in the everyday. Yeah.
And I think that's why I really admire her character. And I think there's so much of Ray Bradbury in that character as a poet, because he did write poetry, as well as novels and short stories. But there's just that wonderful delight in experiencing not just nature, but conversation, experiencing even discipline. Remember, she said, I was spanked when I've been naughty. I've had discipline. I've been learning to control my emotions, learning to her family work together to raise her. You know, it's like not the state. Mrs. Bowles' kids come home 3 days a month and they hate her. They want to kick her.
It really highlights just how absurd the world is, the point you made before about how the kids are out doing thrill kills.
Yes.
So on the same night that Montag's escaping, he's murdered the fireman, but...
full of remorse and pity.
Yeah, but you've got then kids out trying to complete thrill kills for no reason other than to, I don't know how to word it.
Well,
to keep them entertained.
Yes, exactly.
But then, I've lost my train of thought now.
But Clarisse was killed in that way. They think, Beatty says Clarisse was killed, I believe, by a car. Remember, that's when he was thinking about her. Did she die here? Are these the ones who killed her?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's in the novel. I can always cross-check.
I can't remember that bit.
When he's crossing the road. But he does talk to Beatty about the family and how they were forced to leave, because he wants to know whether she died.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure from memory where that was, where Beatty does say that. Probably just before she died, before they burn his own house, I think.
But where my thought was going before was that you have something so targeting like the Hound that will go after Montag rather than all these other hooligans and get them off the street. They're going after him, and then when they can't get him, they just set up some poor innocent person just to make it look... They don't care.
No.
They don't even care that he gets away.
And how frightening is the reality TV aspect to that?
Yeah. 70
years before. Yeah. It's like a reality TV show, like a thrill kill on TV.
Yeah.
The tremendous, even greater irony when I think about it, they're willing to keep up that facade that they've got him, even at the very moment they're going to total annihilation in war. Mm. Yeah. And where that's really interesting is that I was recently reading some books on German history, and one of the things you notice is how even in the very last days and weeks of the Nazi regime, when they're being attacked on all sides, you still had endless political intrigues amongst the Nazi leadership. You had endless attempts by Heinrich Himmler to try and create an SS state within a state and have a transition to power. I won't go on about it too much, except to say it's just like in that novel. Even they're on the brink of total destruction, but they're still got to make sure the public are safe and feel that everything's under control. I found that historically quite accurate, quite plausible, that's how power works. That they will not relinquish it under any circumstance, unless completely and utterly destroyed.
There's no hope for the average people like Favour and Montag to stand up to that.
No, all they can do is go off into the remote communities and then come back after. I think Grazer calls it after the status quo, the dreaded status quo is destroyed by war.
Yeah, when they ruin themselves.
And then he said, hopefully, then the information we have might help us a little in trying to rebuild or to bring about a better world. But there's always that undercurrent of I don't like to use the word pessimism because I don't think Ray Bradbury was a pessimist at all. But I think he's a very aware writer, and he keeps saying, just because you've got the knowledge, even when you have the opportunity to use it, you don't always use it. Just because you know things are bad, you don't always oppose them. Many times they've had these dark ages and gone back to where civilization seems to be decaying, which many people might say is true today.
Well, I don't feel like you might see something horrific like the Holocaust and think that'll never happen again.
Yes.
But there's always going to be people in the world that will try and make that happen.
Yes.
Like, you might think that everyone's lived and learnt, but it's just a cycle.
And on that issue, like, it's terrifying how quickly, since October 7 last year, how quickly we've seen public displays of anti-Semitism. You know, you will always have groups who might be anti-Zionist or anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic, but the general tone of society, especially in the West, keeps them from being too vehement in their public expressions of that idea. But after this attack in Israel, they've come out swinging. They are so virulently anti-Semitic in a public way, which is quite shocking to our generation, who all grew up in the baby boomers generation, where we thought all that was behind us. You know, as a historian by training, I'm aware of anti-Semitism in the West and in other countries, but I've been quite taken aback about how quickly the media, how quickly professional groups like in education are giving a voice to what is effectively anti-Semitism. I find that quite frightening. I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. You know, you always have to be vigilant that these groups don't get a foothold, but they have definitely got a foothold at the moment. There are so many pro-Palestinian, and I don't want to get involved too much in the debate about Palestine and Israel, but just to say about this idea of anti-Semitism and hatred, how quickly it can be spread once the media is involved, once education groups and universities and unions are involved, once you give platforms in social media to these people.
Yeah.
It's that to me is quite together into one garment for us. And that ties in with what you were saying about Granger's grandfather, about how he did things, he embodied things, he made connections with people, he impressed himself not only on materials he worked with, but in his relationships with people. And the same with this. It's not just that, like for us, Fahrenheit 451 is magical, and it does have important things to say, and it's full of the details of life. But I love the way Ray Bradbury, who did write TV scripts, who did write screenplays, who wrote poetry, who was involved in different mediums. He's saying, find it in a record, in an old phonograph record, find it in a TV show. I think that's a salutary lesson for us, because surrounded by all this wonderful technology we have with social media, it can be used for trite purposes. It can be used for sinister purposes. Whereas, it can also be used to ennoble us and to make us think more and to value life more by showing us interesting, important details of life, whatever they are, whether they're in nature or whether they're in our relationships or whatever. I thoroughly enjoy reading that passage. It just reminds me that for all his love of books, he realised that it's what they embody is more important, the experiences. Just like that man's life was how he interacted with others, what the things he left behind, including how he impressed his personality on people. That to me is how I'd like to end the book for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think it was a really good read. I liked just being able to... I liked that, for me, it was written in the 50s, but there's still so much I can relate to now. Like, as I was saying before, just when I am listening to too many podcasts and music, or I'm trying to multitask too much and I feel worse off, I can just relate to a lot in this book.
Yes.
When I open up my phone and I'm constantly bombarded with short videos and suddenly I've sat there for half an hour and it's suddenly gone. And I think the older I get, the more I realise how important family is and purpose and just the human experience. That's the point of living. It's as simple as that. Why are they so miserable? Because they're not doing even the negative things. You have to do something and go through the human experience, not numb it down.
They don't even suffer with depth, do they? They'd rather hide it by drugs and distraction.
Yeah.
Is that sort of what you're trying to say? Like they don't even... They're not having even the best of a negative experience.
Yeah.
The closest they got to was when Mrs. Phelps or Mrs. Bowles, I think it was Mrs. Bowles, was freaking out about the poem. But instead of her taking it the way someone like Montag would, as an insight, what's wrong with me, as a stepping stone. For her, it's, yes, destroy the books. It just confirms her empty life, because for her, she doesn't want to confront it.
Whereas I'd rather be like the woman who set herself on fire. Have something you care about and that makes you feel that much passion and purpose.
Yes.
Which I think a lot of people look for when they're looking at characters. They have to have a purpose and something you relate to that makes you feel something.
Yes.
So I think it was, really interesting.
Yes, a very prophetic and very well written book.
Cool.
And deserves to be read for another 70 years or more to come.
Yeah. It's so empty after he's with Mildred and she's just listening to the shells and everything's just blank and empty. That this other woman will die for something that makes her feel alive.
Very good point. Yes. Look how she's touching the covers, the titles. They've become part of her soul.
Because when you're reading literature and taking things in, it's a human experience. They're feeling their emotions. They're expressing themselves, and compared to their world where it's just nothingness, squashed down every thought and feeling that isn't accepted by everybody.
Yes.
So you can see how that would feel more like friends and family than everyone around. And you'd die for your friends and family.
Yes, but in their world, they've been breaking apart all those ties to friends and family. Families are broken up. Children are educated by the state. People are they're encouraged only to have children to keep the population going, to provide the next generation of jet fighters, basically.
Because so Montag's 30, so in the 50s back then, you already had a family.
Yes.
You'd have young kids already.
Yes.
Well, he's married, but...
He's married, but they're childless.
Yeah, family orientated back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a complete opposite of the back in the 50s in America, which physically was one of the most fortunate of the Allies, because it wasn't directly affected by the Second World War on home soil. So therefore, they were highly prosperous. I mean, their economy was booming under in the 50s, in the post-war period. And you have that kind of like stereotypical suburban life, and the mum at home, the kids at school, everybody's happy, dad's got the job, full employment. But this is a complete parody of that world. Families don't even, there doesn't seem to be love in deep down. He loves her, but the love isn't encouraged by their daily contact. There are no children to cherish. She's more concerned with having cocktails with her friends, watching a 5-minute Clara Dove serial on TV for 5 minutes, and then watch crazy antics of a magician and a rabbit.
Oh, okay, so because even when he's imagining her dying, there's not much about her. But then that brings me to some paragraphs that I absolutely loved at the end of the book. I think it's Granger who's talking about how when people die, everyone must leave something behind when he dies. My grandfather said, a child or a book or a painting or a house or a wall built or a pair of shoes made or a garden planted, something your hand touched some way so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you're there. And then a little while later, after he's talking about his grandfather, he said, grandfather's been dead for all these years, but if you lifted my skull, by God, in the convolutions of my brain, you'd find the big ridges of his thumbprint. He touched me.
Yes.
He loves her because he's her wife, but she never touched him like that because she wasn't allowed to develop herself and her personality, really. Everything's squashed. You can't impact the people around you. So
and the irony is she dies by being completely compacted by that building.
Yeah, and he can't remember anything. I think of her hands, but I don't see them doing anything at all.
No.
They just hang there.
And only at the very last moment he remembers where he met her.
Yeah.
Which for him was important because she couldn't remember. It's like their marriage didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Whereas for him it did. He wanted it to mean something.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, when she's on, he finds her overdosed on drugs, and she seems to be. He keeps talking about the seashells in her ears and how she's basically being washed by waves of music and everything. I find that very interesting because when he reads Dover Beach to her and her neighbours, all the imagery is to do with the sea at night. It's like, and how empty Mrs. Bowles and Mrs. Phelps are, and how they know this the drear and naked shingles of the world. It's such a barren image.
It is.
And British, believe me, as a ex-Pommy, British beaches are pretty shingly. the pebbles are not sand.
No, very bleak.
Yes, very bleak. And I've always found that quite interesting, how that poem seems to be reminiscent of almost of her overdosing. It's in the echo of the sea imagery. I did find that quite interesting. But I think for me that immolation scene where she's willing to die, as you say, with her for something that matters, just like they were willing to die for a religious truth which they thought would change the world. She's willing to die for something which gives her life fulfillment, pleasure, and meaning. You know, I mean, so much of the problem with all this, the contemporary culture in the novel, is that it doesn't mean anything. It's a pure distraction. It's a pure attempt to stunt the individual, to enforce social cohesion by people just being full of adrenaline, or being numbed out on drugs.
Yeah.
Either way, the result's the same. You crush, break up the family, break up any bonds. No real friendships between people. You know, friends are supposed to be equals with common goals, but these people don't have any goals. They just have distractions.
What are their goals? Oh, let's save money to put a new wall within the
Yes.
TV wall in. We've just spent however many grand on the last 3, but I want a 4th one.
Yes. Got to keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah. Like, no wonder you're miserable.
But that's, again, 70 years later, after this novel, it's terrifying that not that we haven't got great technology, and Faber and the others keep saying it's not the technology that's the problem. Ray Bradbury wrote a number, had his own TV shows, the Ray Bradbury Hour, I think it was called, and he used to write a lot of film scripts for TV. He loved radio, television. He did screenplays. It wasn't just books, but the point being, he saw that these great means could be put to very shallow ends or nefarious ends, like for the state to control you, and often both. Why? Because Beatty says everybody's happy. The happiness is the most shallow, materialistic kind of happiness you can imagine. You've got your 4 TVs, you've got your drugs, you've got your Shell earphones, you've got your cocktails. Or you can go, if you're feeling sad, go for 120 miles an hour on the freeway. And if you kill people, oh, well, oops. That was just Clarissa McClellan, you know.
Yeah.
A girl with who cherished life, experience, imagination, social contact. Yeah. All the things which he seems to cherish too. Yeah. Yes, that was a very good call to read that novel and that last paragraph.
Attempt at episode 1 of Keay Conversations. My name is Reddy Keay and I'm here with my father,
Mark Keay.
And this podcast is just going to be us reading. Basically, every time we do this, we're going to pick a book, we're going to read it, and then we're just going to chat about it.